right, here we are. We are live. Today is Sunday, April 9th,
Yep.
2017. Welcome to the Atheist Experience live from Austin, Texas. I'm your host, Matt Dillahunty. Joining me, Tracie Harris,
Hey.
who hosted, didn't you host 2 weeks ago?
I did with Phil Ferguson.
Yes. How'd that go?
I thought it was fun.
Cool.
Yeah.
I've been traveling. I'm here this week and I'm here next week. And then I'm off for 2 weeks. I guess I might as well make those as kind of quickie announcements, even though this isn't the Let's Promote Matt thing. But I'll be at ReasonCon in North Carolina on the 22nd,
Yay.
and the Detroit Coalition of Reason on the 29th. And last week was one of the best weekends of my life. I had met James Randi before at the Amazing Meeting 7, but we'd never had a lot of interaction in person. And I went to Vancouver. Hung out with him during the day, and then we sat down and had a conversation, which is now available on YouTube, but don't go watch it until after you're done watching this, because, I mean, that'd be silly, trying to watch two things at once. All you'd end up with is like Tracie superimposed with Randy's beard, and that'd just be confusing.
It would confuse me.
But we also, after the discussion with Randy on magic and skepticism, I was fortunate enough to be part of a magic show with myself and Murray Hatfield and Sean Farquhar, the two-time world champion of magic. I'm contractually obligated to say that, but that's not going to be posted on YouTube, so, you missed it. Should have shown up in person.
There you go.
I don't know that we had any special ACA announcements. I'm sure someone will come running in from the other room and hand me a bulletin if it was incredibly important, but did you have anything?
No, I don't think so.
All right. So in that case, who are we and what are we doing here? Well, the Atheist Experience is a live program that we broadcast over YouTube and a number of other places. Every week it's sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational organization promoting separation of church and state and the promotion of atheist culture in Austin, Texas. We're seen around the world. We have been.
Yeah.
Primarily, we have conversations. There's a telephone number that you can dial right there, except that you won't get through right now because I see all the lines are full. And after the show's over, we get together and go to dinner at Star of India, 2900 West Anderson Lane. It's right there at the very, very bottom. And clearly, we have some flowers, which I'm going to shake the table, and they're going to keep moving around.
Yeah.
So we're going to get right into it with live calls, including a rarity. Dillan here in Austin is calling. How are you, Dillan?
Good. How are you guys?
Good.
We're doing pretty good.
Great. Before I start my question off, if you don't mind, can I give you a little bit of my background?
Sure.
Okay. So I'm 18 now. I'm about to go to college, and like most, I guess, urban kids, I was raised in a Christian family. My family is very Christian. And I never questioned it. I got baptized when I was 13. And obviously for atheists, the more and more you open up and actually start thinking for yourself, you learn more. Mm-hmm. And so what I've come to believe now is what you guys believe. And simply before I ask my question, the time when I did believe in God, and it, I guess you could say a miracle or whatever, believers say, they have little testaments and, things that they're experienced.
Sure.
Well, my experience, the only experience that I had was when I ran away. I was 17. I ran away after my dad, caught me doing, smoking weed. So that's a simple, illegal thing to do, right? Mm-hmm. But ran away and got pulled over by the cops when I ran away, took me back home, ran away again. Didn't know where I was going to go, and I almost got hit by a car. And I guess that was the time that when I almost got hit by the car, I felt something, and I translated that to be God, right?
Okay.
Sure.
Well, that was what I translated it as, and now I don't. It's a feeling, because that feeling could have been anything. We don't know what it was. No one does. But I guess my question for you now is, what do I go about with my parents and my family, knowing that they're so Christian, and should I ever open up to them about me being atheist? Because for all I know, they could, disown me. That's how powerful the mind is, and how brainwashed I think everybody is.
What are your perceived benefits and what are your perceived costs based on your personal situation?
Well, if I told my parents, I definitely think that they wouldn't look at me the same, and they wouldn't love me like they did or do now.
Mm-hmm.
And sadly, that all comes with the religion. That God's more important to them than I am, technically
Right.
speaking.
Okay.
And that's heartbreaking.
Sure.
But I don't know.
What is the
would you guys
benefit, though? I mean, clearly you're asking about should you come out. So what compels you to feel like you would like to come out?
Well, I'm going to have kids one day. I don't want to raise my kids to go to church and have to listen to the things that they tell them and not being able to think for themselves, especially when they're developing. And
Are you planning on having kids soon?
No, obviously not. No,
Okay.
10 years. It's just for the future, I guess I could say. I wouldn't want to lie to my parents, but I feel like I'm going to be living a lie, technically.
You're talking about after you have kids, this concerns you. Is that right?
Well,
or does it concern? So it concerns you now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Going to college, and they asked me to go to church. And
here's a question for you, and this is I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just thinking there's different ways to look at this. Are there things you've done in your life that you have not told your parents?
Well, of course.
Okay. Do you feel like your life is a lie because you haven't told them?
No, I don't think my life's a lie at all.
Right, and I mean, but I guess what I'm saying is there are some things that we sort of hold back for politic reasons, and some things just, this doesn't really need to be shared, and it just depends on what compels you to want to share it. And some people do have a powerful compulsion, like sometimes they feel like they feel like the acceptance that you described, for example, when you say they love me and because they think I believe a certain way, and if they knew differently, they wouldn't feel the same way. And so some people feel like the love that their parents are giving them is somehow invalidated by the reality that they believe they wouldn't get it if their parents actually knew what was in their minds. And so they feel like withholding in order to secure a love that is not valid, right? It's not really freely, consensually, in an informed way given, makes that bond somehow less. And so they want to come forward and they would rather let the chips fall where they may and accept the relationship in a way that is honest and straightforward, even if it means a reduced bond or a reduced capacity for that familial bond. So it kind of depends on what you hope, what you want to gain, and you're describing what you might
gain.
And you're saying, like, in the future, if I have children, it's gonna be a conversation that comes up. I might want to have it now as opposed to initiating it later. And that's up to you, and certainly it's something to think about.
There's also an assessment of what the risks are. Don't get me wrong. I want as many people to be out about their non-belief as possible because that gets us to normalcy, where it's not such a big surprise.
Definitely, but then you get judged by all the.
So the only issue here is, which is more important to you, maintaining the status quo, or being who you are and being willing to accept the consequences? Because we've heard from people who, after they let their parents and their family know, they lose all of those relationships. They're essentially ostracized and cut off. There are also people who are ostracized for a period of time, and then things improve.
Yeah.
My parents were, of course, distraught. Things will never get back to normal, but there is a new normal, and we get along, and we love each other, and they come and visit. They just think that I'm working for Satan and leading people to hell. But somehow they've managed to kind of put it in God's hands. And that was in part due to a conversation that I had that was, once they realized that I'm still the same person, I have different views on a number of things, but they still love me. They can tell that, I'm an honest, decent person. They know that I didn't just go, oh, I don't want anything to do. They know I'm not lying, or I don't think they suspect that I'm lying about whether I believe. And I told them, I was like, you believe in God. You believe that God has a plan. You believe that God wants me to know He exists. You know that I'm not going to become convinced of that just because you say so, or because somebody else gives me their testimony, or because you pointed to a verse in, a holy book or whatever. So the best thing they can do is pray that God will reveal himself to me, and that put it in God's hands. It put all the responsibility back where it belongs. Whether God exists or not, all of the responsibility for that relationship between you and God is on God. Because unless you're just sitting there going, nope, don't want no God. But that's not the case, and it may take some time, and there may be a rough period where you have to give them some leeway to kind of be. You have to recognize that this is what their religion has done to their mind.
Yeah.
And that's going to dictate how they interact with you at first. How they interact with you afterwards is going to depend on your reaction.
What's your denomination, Dillan?
That's a Methodist, United Methodist.
Okay.
Christian. Yeah, I mean, that's not me now. That's obviously what it used to be.
Right. That's what I'm just asking what your family context is.
Yeah, it's. I guess before I make a question/statement, if that makes sense, I was going to ask Matt, if you could somehow not tell them, take that back, and then not have to worry about the problems that it caused, would you?
No.
No, that's what I thought. Yeah.
So Greta Christina wrote a book on coming out, the reasons why, and all this other stuff, and she interviewed about, I think, 400 people or so, and of all of them, only one of them regretted coming out. Now, many of them went through difficult periods. Some of them, never heard from close friends and relatives again. But only one of them actually regretted it, and because there is a benefit to being, hey, you're 18, you're getting ready to head out, and you should be in this position, even by their religious doctrine, of being able to make up your own mind and live and control your own life to the extent that that's possible.
Right.
I can't predict what's going to happen in any situation, because I've heard from people who've been in awful ones, and I've heard from people where, they came out, and after a convert, like Dan Barker, he lost his religious views, and then his parents wound up agreeing with him, and giving up their religion as well. I don't think that's the typical case.
That's another question, though, is how integral is religion, like, in your own life due to appeasing your family at this point? Like, are you going to church and stuff to make them happy, or how is this working?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
yeah, I went to church.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so this is impacting your life. It's not like you live somewhere else and they're not checking up on you. And okay.
Right. Like and I'm a very recent, I guess, outspoken in my own head, deciding that I am an atheist.
Okay.
And like today when I went to church, we have this, teen ministry for 18 and younger high school. And the guy, he doesn't have any, as you could say, any Christian priest, but he's a teenage guy preaching to kids. And he literally said on a slideshow, the right thing to do is believe in God. The wrong thing to do is question it. And I was like in awe that he said that. It's just ridiculous. It's just crazy. It's like believing in, Santa Claus. But your parents believe it wholeheartly and would die for it. It's crazy.
I think the thing that bothers me, though, is the second part of that, where you say about, it's wrong to question, because if what you're saying is obvious truth,
no,
then
that's what the guy said, by the way.
Oh, no, I understand. I'm just saying that if what he's preaching is such clear truth, then questioning shouldn't be a problem.
It should be trivial. It should be like,
go ahead and question.
Hey,
we're happy to explain
let me question this, and then you get a flood of evidence.
Could you imagine being in a physics class
crazy.
where the professor says, don't question it, don't ask questions. I'm going to present this material, but don't question me about it? Like, seriously, can you imagine that?
Yeah, and it's like and I've noticed it because I'm 18. When I was younger, it happened. And most kids, they don't think about it. People just don't. I feel like people don't think about it. They don't even bother. They just trust it because their parents raised them.
Yeah.
And then they think about it and they put it together, and then now they're in trouble.
I had a bit of a revelation
I feel like they're going to hell.
at a recent debate because I tend to run in apologist circles. I have a number of friends who are apologists. We debate, et cetera. I think I mentioned before on the show, the 400 or 500 people who were there at this Baptist church, They never even heard of William Lane Craig. They weren't familiar with the arguments. They didn't know any of this. Literally, all they seem to know is God's real, Jesus loves me, and that's all I need to know or care about. And there is no questioning, and that's troubling. I will say this, though, Dillan, and that's, if you decide to come out, the best advice I think I can give is, please don't make a big deal out of it, and don't begin with the A word.
Right.
Don't do this. Sit down. We need to talk. I have something to tell you.
Yeah, make it a big deal.
I'm an atheist. Instead, I think what's worked best, because it's honest, is to gradually start being who you actually are more and more around them, and questions are going to come up. And it's fine to say, I don't believe what I used to believe. And let the conversation kind of progress from there. You're going to get, you may get horrible reactions, or you may just get, well, what do you mean? Or, oh, this is just teenage rebellion crap. But, there's only so long that they can claim that it's
And I mean, you can even
teenage
phrase
rebellion.
it in softer, more passive ways, like, I have doubts about things I used to believe. And that could even open, passive sort of discussions where you're speaking for yourself instead of throwing questions at them, to say things like, I used to believe this, and then I started wondering about how does this make sense, because this and this and this, and this didn't make sense to me, and so now I have a doubt about this where I used to believe it, and I'm starting to have some doubts, and there's some things I need to think through.
And you just need to be honest and make sure that they know that this isn't about them.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
It's not about them. It's not about what you think about them. It's not that you're mad at them. This is about you and what you are or are not convinced of.
Yeah, that's a great thing to remember too, is to
No, I
consistently
definitely know
keep
that.
the conversation around, this is just me saying what I'm thinking and what I'm doubting and what I'm having trouble believing. And this
It's not
is
like you have a choice in it.
Yeah.
I mean, they'll probably, many people will tell you, oh, well, you can choose Jesus. No, you can't. You can't choose to be convinced of something.
Right.
But,
Yeah, you either believe it or you don't.
yeah.
Well, I hope that was a helpful discussion. I don't know if it was.
If not, I mean,
mean-
depending on what you decide, call back and let us know how it went, or what, if you decided, hey, I'm not going to, bother with it right now.
And that's the thing, you can always do it later. It's like once the cat's out of the bag, the cat's kind of
Definitely.
out of the bag. You can't, like you were telling Matt, if you could back it up. Well, you can't back it up. So you can always reconsider and consider like how you want to do it, when you want to do it, what's the best thing for your situation. And you can consider that all the way up until any time you decide to pull the trigger on that.
Who's paying for college?
Right.
Good question.
They are, actually. That's the thing.
Oh, well, that's a good question.
I'd say that I don't care how many people think that this is me encouraging dishonesty. I'd say that factors in, because there have been people who, I'm mom, dad, I'm an atheist. Okay, well, we're not paying for your college.
Yeah.
In part because they want to blame, college.
I was going to ask you, too, I mean, can I make a comment really quick before we go?
Sure.
So, like, when I did get convinced, or not convinced, opened up to this recently, things like being taught about Noah's Ark, simple thing that people believe, being a Christian, 6,600 years or whatever, what the Christian Bible preaches, and take it literally. I mean, there's trees out there that are a lot older than that. And how is that not enough evidence to people that something's wrong with the Bible, including all the horrible things like rape and killing? It's just horrible.
Right.
Like things like that make questions. That's just crazy to me that people wholeheartedly believe it, especially if there's multiple religions, because somebody's got to be wrong, right? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, well, one of the things is if you're not ever questioning it, then I don't know how you find your way out,
Yeah, you don't.
Exactly.
And the other thing is that religions have protective mechanisms built in. I had plenty of questions, growing up, but I was also pretty much taught that I don't know enough. I'm a limited, fallen being. And so if you go to your preacher and he tells you, gives you some explanation, even if it doesn't make sense, you will probably accept it and try to find a way to make it make sense.
Yeah.
And if he does it's a mystery, we just can't know that. Maybe we'll find out when we get to heaven and God will reveal it all to us.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Boy, that didn't give you any new information, and yet it certainly can be satisfying to some people to say, I was really uncomfortable with not knowing, but now you've reminded me that there's someone who knows everything and they will ease this discomfort at a later date. And so now I don't have to worry about it.
And there are people who will actually shame you for even not accepting that there are things you just can't know and aren't supposed to know, and that you're being belligerent somehow to say, no, this really needs to add up, and it's not adding up. And they're just like, well, if the sum is not making sense to you, then you need to just accept it, and you need to quit questioning God, because who are you?
Yeah.
Job?
I mean, I wholeheartedly believe we're animals, just like a monkey is an animal, and we're here for, we don't know the reason, we're just here, and we're living. We don't have purpose, really. We just live out here, and we're making it a better place, it feels like. We're trying to make... I feel like Christians that look at atheists feel like we're trying to make it worse. And when I look at debates, the atheist is usually the one that's super calm and chill. And then the Christian...
Well, sometimes. And calmness and chillness isn't any,
it doesn't mean you're right.
testimony to being right.
Definitely doesn't. But I've just noticed that. Well, I appreciate it, guys.
Thanks,
Sure,
Dylan.
thank you.
All right. Yeah, boy, I was glad to take Dylan's call, partially because he helped us with the pre-show phone system, but also because he's in Austin, and that's kind of rare. I can remember
It is rare.
12 plus years ago when I first started doing the show, and we were in the tiny little public access studio. And
Dylan could come to dinner.
yes, assuming he's not running away and being escorted back by the police for his terrible chronic habit, but. But we used to get calls, tons of calls from Austin, and now almost none. So it's nice that the audience has grown to the point where it's difficult for people who live locally to call in. But some of them are actually sitting out there on the other side of the glass, too.
Yeah, we have. And a lot of those people are not from Austin.
We've got Jeff on the line from Tampa, who evidently has issues with you and I and something we said. So it's a good thing we're both here today.
Okay.
Hey, Jeff.
Hi, how's it going?
Okay.
Good.
Okay. So I was listening to your show, at the end of February, and I thought there was some kind of equivocation or confusion with the use of the word possible. So if you don't mind, I'll start with a question, right?
Okay.
Sure.
So true or false? If X is not known to be impossible, then for all I know, X is possible.
I don't understand the addition of "for all I know." Because what you know is irrelevant to whether or not X is possible.
All right, so I'm glad that you caught that. I'm glad that you caught that, because the phrase "for all I know, X is possible" is important in philosophy. It's called epistemically possible.
Yes.
So, in fact, X is not known to be impossible is logically equivalent to "for all I know, X is possible."
It would be logically possible. Epistemic possibility would need to be demonstrated.
Well, let me just say it again. It's just a logical tautology. This is just propositional logic. This doesn't have anything to do with, atheism or theism.
I understand that, but to say...
Okay, X is...
Okay.
I'm just saying if I say X is not known to be impossible, that there's a logical proof. It's only 3 steps. You can just show that's just logically equivalent to for all I know, X is possible.
Okay.
That's my only
my only concern is whether or not X is possible. I don't care about "for all you know."
Okay, that's cool. So let's go. Let's go on to that. So let's try this question. So true or false? If X is not known to be impossible, then that does not imply that X is possible.
True.
All right. So I have to preface my answer by saying that this may sound like a joke, but it's a serious philosophical point. So do you know that that's true?
Well, it depends on what we're going to define as "no," but yes, I know that to be true based on my usage of the word knowledge.
Okay.
But I would also say whether or not I know it to be true is irrelevant. I believe it to be true and have good reasons for it. Whether or not that counts as knowledge is immaterial.
All right. Well, what you've stumbled upon is called the knowability paradox, and in fact, that proposition that I just read, if X is not known to be impossible, then that does not imply that X is possible. that's provably not knowable. And I can.
I didn't say it
break that
was
down for you.
knowable, which is why I objected as soon as you tried to insert a knowledge claim there. What I said was I believe that to be the case, and for good reason. The mere fact that something has not been demonstrated to be impossible does not mean that it is possible.
Right. I completely understand where you're coming from.
That's
You're
all we were saying.
You know, that there's a set of impossible things, and a subset of that is the things that are known to be impossible. Right.
Right.
Yes.
You're saying if you're not in that subset, you could be in the immediately containing set, right? And you could be something could be impossible, but you might not know.
But you're not aware of it.
Right.
Yes.
All right. So let's let P equal X equals let P equal X is impossible. All right. So
I need a whiteboard.
You're asserting.
Do you want to use
All
my
right,
iPad?
Go ahead. I just.
All right. So P equals X is impossible. All right.
Okay.
So what you're doing is that you're asserting the truth of the following statement. You're saying P, but P is not known. That's called the knowability paradox, and it's proved that that is not knowable. So
Not knowable? Not knowable or not
Yeah.
known? What isn't knowable? And how did we
unknowable.
determine that it's not knowable?
Can I just ask something? And you're going to have to forgive me because I'm not up on philosophy. But if I were to say to somebody that if I don't know that what someone just said is a lie, does that make what they just said true?
no.
Okay, that's kind of how I'm looking at possible and impossible. I don't know that they've lied or told the truth. I have no idea which is correct. And yet the fact that I don't know that it's a lie does not mean that it isn't a lie. Right?
Right.
Okay.
But I also have a problem with this issue of shifting from what is known to what is knowable. For example, I could say I've got a $100 bill in my wallet, and you don't know, but you also don't know whether or not it's knowable.
Okay. But actually, sometimes you can prove that something is not knowable. You can start with the statement that you know it, and if you derive the statement that you don't know it, then it's unknowable. And that's what happens when you have.
Okay. So I don't disagree with you that it may be possible to demonstrate that something is unknowable, but what you just said doesn't fit that, because you're still dealing basically, and also I want to make clear that in this sort of conversation, there's an equivocation between known, with the definition of is aware of, and known in the epistemological sense of what counts as knowledge. So I don't want to sit here and worry about equivocations over whether we're talking about aware of or familiar with, et cetera. So let me just ask this. We both agree that the mere fact that something isn't impossible or isn't known to be impossible doesn't tell you whether or not it's possible, right?
Right.
Okay. So what's the issue? I don't know what the issue is.
The issue is that whole phrase that you just agreed to is proven to be unknowable. You have a phrase that says P, but P is not known.
But I guess the problem is we agree on the foundation of what was said 2 weeks ago, which is if we don't know if something is possible or impossible, then it doesn't really make sense to declare it to be possible because we don't know if it's possible or impossible, right? I mean, don't we all agree on at least that?
Maybe I think I can explain the problem by use of an example.
That'd be much better than P's and X's.
Okay.
Right. All right, so let's take this ridiculous thing called last Thursdayism. Now, there's a religious version of this, but we just want the philosophical claim.
It's the 5-minute universe.
Right. So, the universe was created last Thursday. We've been implanted with these false memories. Light was created to make it appear that it came from distant stars, and it was appropriately redshifted and all that. And part of this claim is that there's no test that we can make to demonstrate that last Thursdayism is, false.
It's an unfalsifiable proposition.
Right.
Right. So,
and by the way, it would seem to be untestable.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's a kind of an example that's created to sort of dance along the epistemological boundaries, So So here's the question. Would you say that last Thursdayism is impossible?
No.
Right. So that's just because we can't demonstrate it to be impossible.
Correct.
So,
But I also wouldn't
so-
say.
I also wouldn't say it's possible.
Right.
I have no way of assessing whether or not last Thursdayism is possible or impossible. And that's a separate issue from the fact that I also don't seem to have any way of determining whether or not last Thursdayism is actually true.
And can I ask a question? And this might be, forgive me if this is a dumb question. Again, I'm not up on philosophy. But what if somebody were to say, just because I can't prove something is possible doesn't mean that it's impossible? For all I know, it may be impossible. Just because I can't prove it's possible.
For all I know.
Right, no, but I'm
So-
just kind of putting it, could you not take the thing that you said at the outset and turn it around and put possible where impossible is and make the same claim?
Yeah.
Would there be
I'm
a
not
reason
really
you
following.
couldn't? Like what you said at first, and you could feel free to correct me if I misstate this because it was, a little confusing for me, but it sounded like what you said was something like, just because I don't know something is impossible, or if it was impossible, then for all I know, it's possible. Like if it's not if I don't know if it is impossible, then for all I know, it's possible. Was that kind of what you said?
Right.
Okay.
And that's like,
Okay.
we're forced to accept that because
Okay.
that's the logical.
So then also, if I don't know that it's possible, then for all I know, it's impossible, right?
I'd have to work that out.
But I mean,
Why?
it should be the same.
So you've got two things, direct logical negations. It works both ways. Both an assertion of possibility and an assertion of impossibility carry with them a need to demonstrate that this is in fact the case. And absent that, you are not warranted to accept either proposition. The only exception that I can think of, which isn't even an exception, it's just a pragmatic tool, is the null hypothesis, that we begin with a presumption that there's no connection between A and B until such time as a connection is demonstrated. It's not a statement of this is the truth that there's no connection. It's a statement of this is the default position, because otherwise you'd be put in a position of accepting many contradictory things and you'd live in cognitive dissonance forever.
I completely, in a way, we're sort of on the same page. Like I said before, I understand. I explained the diagram where if you're not in the realm of known impossible, you could just be impossible, but not known to be impossible.
Yeah, which is why I explained that I'm not overly concerned with what somebody knows. If they claim to know it, I want to know why. And why anybody else should be convinced of this. And what I actually care about are beliefs and whether or not they are rational and consistent with our best understanding of reality.
Right.
Okay.
Right. I guess to me it seems like when I said the equivocation at the beginning, it's most of the time the problem I had in general. Like basically, I don't have a problem with really what you said, except that. When most people say possible in just sort of everyday conversation, they're usually referring to epistemically possible. Like, for all I know, it's possible.
Sure.
And you're using
no, and I think
for all I know, it's impossible.
hang on.
Too,
I will have to look up. I will have to look this up and correct it, because I think what you described is not epistemic possibility. I think that what you're describing is essentially a logical possibility. This is something I went over with Blake Junta over and over and over and over again, because epistemic possibility gets to the actual fact of whether it's possible, whereas within the realm of logical reasoning, if you can't show that it's impossible, this is where we get the anything's possible sort of thing. So when they say,
well, right.
When you
okay, so that sort of nails down what the point I was trying to make. So last Thursdayism is this sort of case designed to show how low a bar epistemically possible is. It's just the lowest bar.
Okay, I still think you're using epistemically possible in place of logically, but we'll have to solve that at another time. Are we in agreement on the facts of the matter, or is there something else that you disagreed with?
Well, I guess to me it seems like you just said about consistency and inconsistency. I mean, it seems to me that you didn't really grok the point about the unknowable. So if you look up the knowability paradox, then you'll sort of see what I'm trying to say.
Well,
What you actually did was assert the truth of a statement that's proven to be unknowable, and I thought that was unusual.
Okay.
So I just think that's a bad way to
that,
go.
No,
I thought that what we said was that we couldn't know if it was possible or impossible.
That's a separate issue.
Okay.
What
sorry.
I said was true, and I pointed out I am convinced that this is in fact the case for good reason. Now, my objection was when you went from when I think your description of the knowable paradox and your usage of epistemically possible are incorrect, or at least they don't mesh with my understanding, so I'll have to look it up and think about it some more. But at the end of the day, though, setting aside all of that, the knowability paradox, all this other stuff, my position is that something should not be viewed as possible merely because its impossibility hasn't been demonstrated. Are we in agreement?
Right.
Okay, that's it. That's all we cared about. Because there were people. Hang on. Because there were people who were asserting that because we haven't shown God to be impossible, therefore God is possible, and that is fallacious. Correct?
Right.
Okay.
So you mind if I try another example just to try to get across my point?
I guess there's like 5 more lines, and I see people, like when you scratch their eyeballs out from P's and X's and knowns and possibilities that have nothing to do with tell us what you believe and why.
All right. So let's take the example of fundamental particles like new fundamental particles.
Let's not. Let's not.
All right. Well, those are epistemically possible, and it just seems silly to say to a physicist, well, wait a second, some new fundamental particle, it could be impossible, but we don't know it's impossible. It's just kind of a weird thing.
Why would that be weird?
Proven that.
Like, why wouldn't that be correct?
It's of no help. Yeah.
I mean, I would think that a physicist would have to acknowledge that if it hasn't been demonstrated as possible, they could go in and investigate and find out that this thing can't be. I mean, couldn't they?
Well, the
Sean
point
Carroll
is that
talks about known unknowns and unknown unknowns.
I don't know.
Anyway, what the hell does any of this have to do with the atheist experience and people's beliefs in gods? Because Lawrence Krauss isn't here. I'll be with him in a couple of weeks. If you put together an email about particle physics, I don't. If I find it interesting, I might ask Lawrence about it. But I don't see what the relevance is. And I don't, if we came to agreement that you're not justified in accepting that something is possible merely because it hasn't been shown to be impossible, then we're in agreement. So why are we continuing on with yet another example?
Because what I'm saying is that, in fact, when people are talking about possible, they're really talking about epistemically possible. Like, it would be silly to say to a physicist, well, wait a second, the magnetic monopole is like that's my favorite theoretical particle. The magnetic monopole, well, wait a second, that could be impossible, but you don't know it's impossible. I mean, it's of no use to people. Like, we don't have the omniscient view to know, in fact, what is or is not impossible. We work with what we know, and that's why people work with epistemically possible.
It just
Correct, because
weird,
epistemic possibility is based on our knowledge of what we can demonstrate.
But what if you had something like epistemology that was like epistemically true, where if I couldn't demonstrate it was a lie, I called it true? I mean, that would be such a mess. Why would people want to think that way?
Well, I don't really. I'm sorry, I don't really follow that, but that would probably be epistemically necessary, is what you're talking about.
I don't think it is necessary, though.
So we've long lost any interest from me, which means we've lost 95% of the audience.
All right.
So do you believe there's a God? Do you believe there's a God? Oh, running away, eh?
I thought it was caller 2. Oh, I guess not. I don't know who.
Well, we've got Uber in Florida.
Hello.
Hello.
That's not your real name.
Maybe
no,
he's a
it's
driver.
Not. It's a nickname.
Cool. Well, we'll go ahead and give you the benefit of the doubt and say that you are in fact Uber until it's been demonstrated that it's impossible for you to be Uber.
Yeah, that'd probably be the wise thing to do. All right, so I guess I was having a little trouble wording it into a question, but I figured it out. So my question is, I'm sure you're familiar with the story, of Moses and the burning bush. Moses talking to God about what he should say to the Israelites, and God responding back to Moses, "I am that I am."
Yeah.
Tell the Israelites, "I am sent you."
Yeah. In fact, I just made reference to
what
that
was it-
this past week. That's an interesting thing that you just brought that up. But go ahead.
Oh, yeah, that is interesting. Well, I just wanted to ask, what would you say if, I guess, somebody came up to you and said that God is I am?
Okay. There's a lot of, when I was religious, there was a whole lot of mysteriousness around this phrase. And then I read a book by Karen Armstrong called The History of God, where she looked at the history of all the Abrahamic religions and how they came together. And she explained it as a phrase, which is like, let's say I'm telling you a story. And I'm saying, like, 3 men were on their way somewhere and blah, blah, blah. And you say, well, where were they going? And I say, well, they went where they went. She says that this is common phrasing. And that when somebody says, tell them I am who I am sent you, it's like almost an irrelevancy. That it's not, the thing isn't about, the story's not about this, it's about something else. It's about freeing these people or about going there and getting these people. That the important thing isn't who sent you, it's your mission. Now, whether or not that's correct, I don't know. But it was certainly an interesting way of looking at it that I hadn't heard or considered before, even though I was very familiar with the phrasing of they went where they went, or I don't know what they had for dinner, they ate what they ate, And
Yeah.
I definitely am familiar with that kind of a phrase or a statement, and she's saying that it's like a common folkloric commentary in the Abrahamic religious tradition. I have no idea. Like I didn't.
But even if it's incorrect, that statement tells me nothing.
No, it really doesn't have a lot of info.
Like I was gonna interject afterwards, I guess, and say I'm not using the Bible as proof or anything. It was just the story kind of. It was a story I learned when I was younger.
Yeah.
I thought about it for a while. I had a different interpretation of it, but that's the Bible,
Well, I can tell you what they taught me when I was in Sunday school, which was that the idea of I am was supposed to have represented the context of eternal existence.
Yeah, the one and only eternal blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah.
They made a very big thing out of it. Whereas now I'm like, I wonder if it was a big thing or if it was just a small thing.
And if Moses comes to me and says, I am sent me, or Yahweh sent me, or Jim Bob sent me, my response is going to be the same. Why do I care? It'd be interesting, I guess, to find out, but when you say, the Lord of the universe sent me, okay, I'm not even convinced there is a Lord of the universe. Why the hell did he need to send you? Why can't he come tell me what he wants to tell me himself?
Yeah. So I guess the reason I took it as a significant story, I guess, is because it was a point in the Bible where I guess God was defining himself in a sense.
But did it define anything any more than saying they went where they went defines where they went?
I think it's a deepity myself, but...
Well, my interpretation of it was God is, if that makes any sense to you.
No, it doesn't.
All right, so...
God is a two-letter
I was
word.
thinking about it in a... words
you
are
could do-
symbols.
Yes, they are. And is would be, well, we don't want to get into the Bill Clinton speak of what, it depends on what is. But, you can look at that and it can seem, this is why I said it's a deepity, it can seem very profound. Oh, God is, like the is, existence is, the eternal is. And it can seem very significant, but only if you're already buying into this. In truth, it has provided you absolutely nothing of substance about what God is. And it has provided you with nothing to confirm that, in fact, God is. Which is the question that I want answered. It's what would it take to convince me that God exists, or that a God is real, or that a God is, let alone is. And telling me
Okay,
God
so-
is doesn't do that.
Well, all right. So here's why I took it as significant because, all right. So the reason why I guess you didn't want to delve into is because it gets a little wordy and confusing. But
Not because it's wordy and confusing. It's short words. Here's what I care about. You believe that God exists, right?
correct.
Why?
Why?
Why do
because-
you believe? That's the only thing I care about. Well, I care about other things, but that's the only thing I care about in this
In context of the show.
in this situation.
No, yeah. Why I believe personally because of experience, proof, I guess, that worked for me. I guess I wasn't always a Christian. I was raised Christian. I was atheist for a while, and then I guess I started just looking into a bit of everything, different philosophies, religions, and came across some answers, I guess, that worked for me. I mean, I don't expect, my understanding or what I know to apply or work for everyone, and I could be wrong.
So you believe for a reason, but you don't think I should believe for that same reason.
No, I think you should believe for the exact same reason, and I would even
Okay,
go
then
as far to say that.
I would like to know, if it's in fact true and you have a good reason, I'd like to know what that reason is so that I could in fact believe. So what's the reason?
Well, all right. So, like you, I was raised Christian, and I didn't necessarily like the Bible or church at first. I mean, I was forced to go. I didn't understand anything. Nothing made sense. I asked a lot of questions. Nobody liked that. But being that I was raised around it, I always ended up, I guess, carrying extra information about God that I didn't necessarily care to know at the time. So, like, is a sin to make an image or an idol of God. That's one of the 10 Commandments. I've always wondered why that was. I never really understood it.
Why don't you wonder if it was, not why it was? Because I don't accept that there's. First of all, I don't accept this notion of sin. I certainly don't accept the notion that it is somehow sinful to make a graven image of something. You seem to be skipping a couple steps to go to why is that the case? When the question is that the case?
Well, see, I've asked a lot of those questions. That's one of the reasons I became an atheist in the first place, is because
what answers?
If you can't prove somebody to something, they shouldn't believe it. At the end of the day, it comes down to that, cut and dry.
Oh my gosh! Why do we need to go in this little tap dance around? You became convinced. What convinced you, and should it convince other people?
What convinced me was that I'm an artist. I make art for fun, and I started studying words, and I write, and I guess it helped me put things into perspective. What convinced me specifically was
yes.
I guess it was that. It was
that.
hearing about. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out exactly how to put it into the best words because I don't want to. I'm not trying to mince this up here, but what convinced me was.
Hey,
Hey,
Uber, what convinced you? What convinced you that the Earth spins on its axis?
I'm not sure if the Earth even does that. I can't prove it to myself. I mean, I haven't. I'm not saying I can't. I haven't. So, I don't really care about that. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff you could do to try to improve that. And, I mean, you could read books about it that is, the Earth is tilted 23.5 degrees this way. I don't know. I haven't proved it to myself, so it's not relevant to me.
Well, I was trying to be as helpful as I could to show
round?
the problem.
How about Earth is round? That's one that would be
Do
easier.
you believe the Earth is round?
It seems more probable and likely, but I can't say I know.
Is there something you're convinced of that you've become convinced of for good reason? Something you actually gave a crap about? Because you don't care about the Earth or its spin, but yet you'll say, I'm an artist and I've studied words and that's what convinced me of a God. Isn't the idea that the Earth spins on its axis not only something that we can trivially demonstrate now, we have much better information and evidence to support this, isn't that a much more trivial claim than that there is an all-knowing, all-powerful, extant agent that exists independent of space and time and cares who you sleep with and doesn't want you to make graven images? And yet you became convinced of that one, and you don't seem to give a rat's ass about the Earth spinning.
It's not that I don't give a rat's ass about the Earth spinning. It's just that at the end of the day, unless I observe something for myself, I can't prove it to myself.
Wow. And you've observed this God?
So tell us about when you observed God.
Well, no, that's the thing. You can't directly observe or
you just
God.
said
Uber, you just said
that if you can't observe it, you can't believe it. And yet you believe God and believe in that God exists. So, and now you're saying, when I ask you when you observed God, now you're saying you can't. So do you not see that you just placed yourself in direct contradiction with yourself?
Yeah, you were very hesitant to express belief in things like the Earth spins on its axis and the Earth is round, but you're very okay expressing a belief in God. And when asked about these questions of physical earth sciences, the response is, since I can't observe it, I feel uncomfortable saying, I'm committed to believing it. And yet you're saying you can't observe God, but you seem to feel comfortable saying that you're committed to believing it. Do you understand the problem that we're seeing?
I understand, but what I mean is you can't observe God with your senses. You can experience God, but you can't observe God.
Okay, wait, we're getting somewhere.
Physical senses.
When you experience God, what is that for you? Like explain that experience to us.
All right. One of the times I guess I had the experience, this probably won't be too shocking. I tried shrooms. And I felt while on shrooms.
Let me ask you this. Do you think that a brain that is chemically altered by a psychedelic substance is more likely to get you to an accurate understanding of reality or an inaccurate understanding of reality?
I think we're made out of chemicals, so
how'd you know
any
that?
understanding we have is going to be based on the chemical reactions going on in our body anyway.
Did you observe those chemicals? You just told me we're made of chemicals. Have you observed that?
I mean, I can pour chemicals on myself and they'll react with my body. I'm made out of atoms and molecules. I'm made out of
How do you know that? Have you observed an atom?
Oh, I mean, you can do things to water, and water's made out of atoms. There's ways.
How do you know that water's made of atoms? Have you observed an atom? We're back to this thing. You said you couldn't believe something if you hadn't observed it, and yet when we start pushing you on things, you make all sorts of declarations that you can't have observed. You've never observed an atom.
I just want to. I think I can cut this a little bit short, though. I mean, we asked Uber here for the reasons why he believes, and he said that it was personal experience, and one of those examples was an experience while he's on shrooms. Now, what I would like to say, first of all, Uber, is I want to personally give you snaps for your honesty, okay? Because a lot of people call up here and they want to argue about apologetics that have zero to do with why they actually believe a God exists. They want to talk about other things that have nothing to do with why they believe, and that is such a waste of time. And so for you to call up and be honest and put yourself out there and say, I had experiences when I was on drugs and I felt like I felt God, and that's why I believe. Now, whether or not we would agree that that's reasonable, we probably would not, because we've had other callers where we've had this conversation. But I do appreciate the fact that at least you are telling us the truth about what convinces you that a God exists, because many people call the show who are not as honest as you.
But I think my issue here is that I'm not convinced, based on what you've said and based on what I understand a reasonable... I don't even think you think that's a good reason, which is why it took you 15 minutes of hemming and hawing about artists and words to finally get to, I had an experience on shrooms.
Well, it's not just an experience on shrooms. You asked for an example. That was one of mine.
No, I didn't ask for an example. I asked for the reason. I asked for a reason.
I said that, I understood a little bit about what you were describing with the mushrooms, but I do agree with Matt that you're talking about basically brain states and physical and mental sensations and emotional feedback is what I'm understanding.
How did you determine that that was God?
Because it has to do with equilibrium, connectivity, oneness. I'm trying to find the right words. It's a little hard. The reason I brought up words in the first place was because, like I said, I'm an artist. I write. So the way I think about things, like everything around us is a noun. Nouns, verb. You describe nouns and verbs using archetypes.
Okay, no, we're not going down this road. How did you determine?
The point I was going to make was if God is a noun.
No,
and we describe God.
God is a noun.
Describe God.
God is a noun,
and sometimes a pronoun.
And if we try to describe God using adjectives, which are adverbs, and or archetypes, which are adjectives and adverbs, is adjectives and adverbs are based on our perception, our five senses: colors, shapes, feelings. But at the end of the day, when you write it on paper, it's all yin and yang.
This is really simple. You had an experience that you are saying was God. How did you determine that that experience was in fact God? How did you conclude that you weren't, that it wasn't something else or you? If I take shrooms and have an experience and tell you that now I believe in a different God from you, how do we tell which one of us is right or if either of us are?
I don't know. You're breaking my brain at this point.
Yeah.
And
do you care? Do you care if what you believe is accurate or not?
Of course, I think.
Well, you say of course. I think most people will say that. But if you actually care, wouldn't you then take steps to ensure that you do have the most accurate understanding, right? Like, wouldn't you want the best tools to figure out whether or not you're more likely correct or not correct? Do you think this nonsensical talk about nouns and adjectives is an actual tool that can lead you to the conclusion that an experience was caused by God?
Well, I mean, language. We're using language right now to discuss God. I think it does help to understand the
language. Language is a tool that conveys a concept from one mind to another. Language is malleable. It changes all the time. We make up new words. We change words. It is nothing but a way for us to communicate an idea. Mm-hmm. The idea is separate, and whether or not the idea points to anything true is also separate from the language. Why would you think that this noun adjective thing is a reliable pathway to determining that you are correct in your interpretation of an experience as having been from God?
What I'm saying is it helped me, I guess what I'm saying is it helped me comprehend or understand things better. I'm not saying that you have to understand
you know what helped me comprehend and understand things better? An understanding of skepticism and critical thinking and logic and science. But the fact that something helps you understand doesn't mean that what you understand is correct. And if you care about whether or not it's true, then what you want is a method to determine whether or not what you believe is true or likely to be true.
So what you're saying is you care whether or not things are true or untrue, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
All right. So that, and for something to be true, that would mean that it would have to be what is, correct or incorrect?
Truth is that which conforms to reality. That's the definition of truth that I'm good with.
All right. So true, it conforms with reality. So it conforms with what is.
Yeah.
Therefore, is God.
No.
Hey, if I say no, this is easy. If I say unicorns does that mean unicorns exist?
Well, no, because it doesn't conform with reality.
Right. And so if you say Jehovah is or Xenu is, does that mean that either of those actually conform to reality? Or comport with reality?
It would depend on what those things are. What is, well, all right, here's...
Yes, how do you find out what they are?
Well, no, all right. So at the end of the day, it goes back to what I guess my definition of God is.
No,
And
at the
my
end of the day,
definition
it
of
does
God-
not.
I guess I am curious because you were talking in terms of the Ten Commandments and carving images and things. So I think
Yeah.
the assumption was that you were going with a biblical God. Is that not correct?
I mean,
What is-
there's a
what
bunch
is
of
God?
different religions and Bibles, but all they do is allude, I guess, to God. I mean, even if they make an image of God, is usually like for instance, in Hinduism, there's the creator, the preserver, and the destroyer.
We're not going to
Like,
we're not going to play multiple religions. What do you believe God is? And if you say is, I hang up.
I believe God is power in a sense. I don't believe somebody would worship God if God had nothing to do with power.
I
If
have
God
a power
didn't have
company.
anything to
Does
do with
that-
power? It wouldn't make sense to people.
You haven't given a sufficient
Yeah.
definition or description of God. God is a power.
This is a little bit like a guy who called when I was on last time and said timelessness was an attribute. And I was like, no, that's not an attribute because if I have something in this hand that's timeless and something in this hand that's not, how do we know? Like, which one can we identify as timeless?
Apart from God is a power, which doesn't tell me a thing, what is God?
Logic. God
Right.
is.
Okay, we're moving on.
Yeah,
I
thanks
appreciate
for
the
your
call.
call.
Thanks so much. God is love. God is an ephemeral feeling.
God is the universe.
This. God is
God is-
everything.
yeah.
God is not. You don't have a concrete. You are so fond of playing with words that now you're playing with the God word and
Because
wasting
I
my
can
time.
pretty much guarantee you that logic and power didn't tell you not to carve an image. Right? It's like, that's not the claim.
Logic and power.
All right.
I just hung up on the wrong person.
No, are you sure? Because 2 is gone.
I did that afterwards. We lost 5 temporarily. That
Oh.
was my problem, my fault.
Okay.
We have Mirek in Toronto. I'll be in Toronto here in a couple months.
Yeah. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Can you hear me?
We
Yes.
can.
All right. Perfect. So I'm actually a theist. My family is from Poland, so they're very religious and they practice Catholicism.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually I attend church, and there was actually one thing that the priest said that was actually quite entertaining to me, which was kind of his way of proving that Christianity is true. And he compared it predominantly to the Muslim faith. He said that for example, when we look at near-death experiences, that Christians will often have near-death experiences seeing Jesus, but Muslims will never have near-death experiences seeing Muhammad. So therefore, Christianity is correct over Islam. And so what I did was
first of all, that's just not true. In the matter of what people do and don't see, people see all sorts of religious iconography, and actually saying that because Christians see Christian images and Muslims don't, even if Muslims didn't, that wouldn't tell you whether or not Christianity is true, especially if Muslims have within their religion, which they do, a prohibition against specific
Pictorial.
imagery of Muhammad. So it's not surprising. But what Muslims do or don't see is irrelevant to whether or not what Christians see is in fact true.
Yeah, and so then what I did was so I also looked it up, and I was not 100% sure about that, so that's why I wanted to ask you guys. And so you really don't think then that gives Christianity any credence over Islam?
No.
I don't think it gives Christianity any credence. Well, the very idea that you're framing this in terms of whether or not Christianity has credence over Islam is irrelevant to whether or not Christianity is true. Because if you had let's say we had 50 levels of falseness and Christianity came in as slightly less false than some other religion, it's still false, right?
Yeah.
So I want to know why it's true. And the fact that people, having near-death experiences might see religious imagery that comports with what they believe doesn't tell me about whether or not what they believe is true.
Yeah, and there's also been a couple of ones in North America where Islamic people would also see Jesus. What would you say about that?
I don't think that there's much of an explanation for what people see when their brains are oxygen deprived and they're dying. I mean, your brain could pop off lots of things. Some people see nothing. Some people report seeing not a thing. And I mean, different people see different things. Now, you know, and even if we all saw the same thing, all that would say is that we, for whatever reason, are having the same experience at death, that our brains are reacting the same way. It wouldn't really give us any objective truth about anything outside our own dying brain.
If everybody saw a dragon, does that mean that what they saw was real and that it ties to the truth of something?
No, it doesn't.
Right. And the answer to your question about why Muslims in North America might in fact see Christian religious imagery might have something to do with the fact that this is what they're exposed to when they read and learn about near-death experiences, for the same reason that when people encounter aliens and have images of aliens and alien abductions, once upon a time we had a wide variety of aliens, which is, if you go back to the old monster movies and the space people are showing up, they looked very, very different. And then around the time of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, you get the almond-headed, big-eyed grays that becomes ingrained in popular culture, such that now when somebody has an alien abduction, they are incredibly more likely to describe that alien as the almond-headed, big-eyed, you know, no-hair, gray alien. Doesn't tell us anything at all about whether or not those aliens exist, whether or not that experience is accurate. When you have something that has become such a part of the culture that surrounds you, it's hardly surprising that you will see images that match with that culture. But Tracie made the better point, which is, even if we all saw the same thing, that doesn't tell us one thing about whether or not there's a life after death, because a near-death experience isn't a death experience. And the fact that you see something with a brain in an incapacitated, diminished state, which may not even be the case, by the way. It may not be that while your brain was incapacitated, you saw this. What may in fact be more likely is that once you regained consciousness, your brain tried to invent a story for the experience, and that's when the visions were invented.
Yeah, so that's actually a very good point, and I can't argue with that. And I just had one other question, and it kind of went around the same lines, and this would more be kind of argument for soul's sake. So there's been people, there's been maybe 20 or 30 cases that I've read about online where people who are born blind will have near-death experiences where they can see things they claim that happens around their body and things like that. So would you say that demonstrates a soul because the brain itself wasn't able to see?
Are we able to determine what they actually experienced?
We're not, no.
Okay, so we're basically would be taking the word of somebody who has never seen, that is claiming that they experienced something that they think might have been sight, right?
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to say that raises an interesting question, because we are actually developing machines that can translate brainwaves into visuals and translate it into sound, so that people are exposed to images and sounds, and then later we have a machine that can translate what they are experiencing in their brain. So it then can put out, a facsimile of the sound, facsimile of the image to different degrees. And so that's a type of thing where maybe some years hence, we would be able to get an idea of what actually is occurring in the brain of somebody who is born blind, who says, I had some sort of experience I think was visual.
And here's a question that troubles me. So you're Catholic, I suppose. Your parents are Catholic?
Yes.
Okay. Let's imagine for a minute that Christianity, and in particular the Catholicism, was true.
Yeah.
What does it say that the best arguments that somebody can come up with it in favor of it is that, hey, when people are near death and their brains aren't working properly, they see things, and sometimes they see religious iconology, and sometimes it maps with Catholicism. Or someone who was blind for their entire life has a near-death experience where they return and report that they were able to see something we can't verify or really test. Why is this God, who I suppose wants at least some people to come to an appreciation and understanding for who he is? Why is it that this isn't obvious, that this isn't uniform? Why why is a Damascus Road experience good enough for Saul, and the rest of us have to go, well, there was this person who had a near-death experience that's kind of sort of like, this here, and it seems a little more reliable, and therefore I will bet my eternal life on that?
Yeah, exactly. That's another thing too.
I mean, if you were God,
I think, and I'm pretty sure you brought this up.
if you were God, would you operate under a paradigm anything like that, where you keep yourself hidden? But when people
wouldn't, no.
do a near death, you give them like a little McNugget, or you let them see somebody who passed on, and they come back with no useful information. Not here's where I buried the fortune, here's where I hid the will. It's I love you and I can't wait for you to join me in heaven.
It also raises all kinds of weird justice questions, right? So if somebody almost dies and they have this experience and God gives them this vision, and then they believe, and I never have any visions, and then I don't believe, and I go to hell when I die. How is that fair that they got this, that God decided to like put his finger on that person and offer them up some proof that he's not willing to give to me, but then I'm judged based on the same, whether I believe it or not, but they were given something I wasn't given.
I mean, I would think that would be immoral, which means that you and I are both more moral than the God that you believe is perfectly moral.
Yeah, it seems like everyone should get the same the same evidence, and then, if we're going to be judged on belief, that evidence should be sufficient for belief.
I don't know.
It shouldn't be.
We've said about 5 things now. I'm wondering if you had any kind of answer for those.
I think he's asking questions. I have a feeling, I'm getting the feeling, I'm sorry, the name was, Mirek. I get the feeling that you're more kind of asking because these are questions that you're actually wondering about yourself.
Well, yeah, that's actually true, because it's kind of like there's so many things in the religion that I have difficulty believing, and I guess maybe this was like the last thing that kind of held me back.
I think it's definitely something worth looking into more. It's, any of these questions that you have, if you look up skeptical responses, you'll find information, either way. Because you're definitely being given information that this is in support of belief. And so I think it's only fair that you could then go and look at the rebuttals to this information on the skeptical side, and then you can determine for yourself what you think makes the most sense.
Yeah, no, of course. And that's actually partially also why I called in, just because I wanted to get some other input and see exactly what you guys would have thought about the whole thing, too, because I still enjoy listening to the show and everything like that.
Oh,
good. Well, I appreciate the call.
Yeah,
and,
thank you.
Keep asking questions. I mean,
thank you very much.
Thanks.
Sure.
As a reminder, after the show's over, a number of the folks involved with the show, which this would be a good time to thank all of the people on the other side of this wall who make sure that the mics and the lights and the cameras and all that stuff actually work. And we just get to sit here and talk and enjoy ourselves.
And thank you to them for 2 weeks ago when I forgot to say thank you, and the show ended without me giving any kind of real sign-off. But
we've got... after the show's over, some of the folks involved will be going to Star of India, not Starve India, which is what somebody thought I said.
That would be hideous. Yeah, no.
2900 West Anderson Lane. We're on the air till about 6 p.m. local here in Austin, and we'll be there 6:30-ish, give or take. We've got Andy in Pennsylvania. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. How are you?
Hi, Andy. We're good.
Hi. I just want to say I've really enjoyed your show. I am a Christian who's kind of been thinking lately, and I've really enjoyed the perspective that you guys give and the logic you present and everything, and it's been very good for me, just kind of how I think through things. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
The question I had for you was something that struck me the other day. I agree with you, on your points that you make sometimes when you talk about, is God moral, or is God can't be because he's not moral, because the slavery thing and other points of, like the slaughtering of Canaanites and all that sort of thing.
I got to interrupt, because it sounded like you were saying that we said God can't exist because God is immoral. I
don't think you said that.
Yeah, maybe that's not phrasing it right, but the feeling I come away with is, well, I kind of feel like all I have to do is prove God's not moral, and that means there's no God.
Oh,
At least there's no Christian God.
No. What you'd have to do is say that this God is purported to be moral, and can be, and its actions that attribute to it are shown to be immoral, and that raises a conflict
on that particular God.
On that particular definition.
You're correct. There's something called the problem of evil, and I usually will say, I may not say it 100% of the time, but usually when I bring it up, I point out that the point of problem of evil is not to demonstrate a God does not exist. It just demonstrates that God does not have the properties of being all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-benevolent.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that kind of takes my talking point away then, because my question was going to be basically what and this came from, I watch a lot of these debates, like, the big atheist guys, Rick Dawkins and all those guys online and everything, and, Harris and those guys. My thinking was, the argument that I hear some make is that, well, maybe God thinks that something is moral that I don't. Like, maybe he thinks it was good to, like, kill a child, and it's kind of like, well, even if I disagree with that, I feel that actually, am I any further along in deciding whether he's there or not? Because does that really matter? I mean, maybe he just views things differently than I do.
Yeah, or maybe he's just a really evil God that likes to torture children.
Yeah, the question of whether God exists is separate from assessing particular definitions and descriptions of God. If someone is saying that God is perfectly moral, and that God commands that it's okay to own people as property and to run around slaughtering, innocents, those two things are in conflict, and either one of those things has to go. I don't believe in God because there hasn't been sufficient evidence to support the claim. I remain unconvinced that any God being exists.
Right. Well, this wasn't my purpose for calling, but can I ask you one quick follow-up question to that point then?
Sure.
It is, and this is something else I've kind of thought about lately, is how do I approach this question? Because I know based on listening to you, I take it that you kind of approach it from, we're starting with a zero, like there's no God, no assumptions about anything, and you make a claim, you tell me what your support is for that. And then the question, though, is that because, a God situation, you may never be able to 100% prove something.
Okay.
So is it more appropriate to say, okay, I'm going to assume nothing and only believe what I can prove, kind of the scientific approach? Or do I say, I'm going to look at all the options, and whichever one seems most likely, I'm going to go with it?
Well, let me ask you this. Now, here's something that I sometimes bring up to people. We're very, very fortunate to have the luxury of not having to believe things without sufficient evidence. Most times in our lives, we're not pressed to make big life-altering decisions without sufficient evidence, right? There's sometimes when we do, and we like to sometimes use the jury trial example. And I always say that is the worst position to ever be in, to have to make a decision about what you think happened. When you're given limited evidence, it might actually even be limited by law. Like maybe there's other evidence that could change your mind, but you're not even allowed to see it, right? For some reason. It was illegally obtained or something. So you don't even know that what you're seeing is the full body of evidence or all the evidence that might convince you. And you're asked to make a decision about someone's innocence or guilt in a situation where people's lives might be on the line. That is a horrible, horrible situation for people to have to be in. Anytime you have to make a decision and there is insufficient evidence and you are forced to decide, that is a horrible situation to be in. My question is, if you weren't put in that situation by something like a courtroom, why would you put yourself in that situation?
Well, I think it's just because of for me, it's because of the implications. I mean, and I completely agree with your point because I've also thought the same thing. It's like I have the luxury of having more information at my fingertips than most people throughout history have. I mean, what if I was like a serf in 7th century England who lived to be 30 years old and never had schooling at all? So,
but what are the implications?
Make any of these decisions?
What are the implications So I'm not saying that you don't have to, that there's not compelling cases with which to make some sort of decision. There's two problems here on the God thing. Number one, I have seen insufficient evidence to warrant a conclusion that a God exists, or that a God could possibly exist, or likely to exist, or is more likely than an alternative. And yet you seem to think that God is more likely than an alternative based on information. So we're already on different footing there. But this isn't just, either a God exists or doesn't. You talked about the potential consequences. Well, which consequences? Because, for example, if you're worried about your afterlife, well, that's only a consequence. That's only a consequence.
I'm thinking about,
That's only a consequence. That's only a consequence.
If there's an afterlife.
If you presuppose that there's an afterlife. What reason do you have to think there's an afterlife?
I guess just because that's what I've always been told.
Yeah.
You know.
And so if it turns out that this life, which we know we have, is the one and only life, then it would seem to me that the better way to make decisions would be to make decisions that affect this life and not some proposed afterlife. Because if you go down that route, are you trying to find your way into the best heaven or avoid the worst hell?
Right. No, I see what you're saying.
I always use the threat of hell and afterlife, like especially a negative afterlife, as that sort of, I describe it as somebody on a used car lot, right? And you're buying a car, and the guy says, I want to get you in this car today. And you say, you know what, I'm going to go home and think about it. And he says, well, we've had 3 couples in here already looking at this car. In fact, I think one of them might be in the back talking to my manager about it right now, trying to make a deal. So they put this pressure on you, right? So it's like, here's this decision that you really aren't, like you wouldn't think of as a pressured decision. You'd like to take your time because you're going to put thousands of dollars down on this, or potentially tens of thousands of dollars. And so you're saying, I need to think about it. But then they say, well, let me add some pressure here to sort of force you to make this decision. And I look at that as like the religious paradigm, right? They give you this God, and then they say this is such a big question. Who is it? McAllister, right? There's an apologist named McAllister, and he says this is one of the big questions. I'm like, this is not a big question. People don't walk around day in and day out wondering if there's a God. They're wondering, how do I pay my mortgage? What if I get fired? What am I making for dinner tonight? What's wrong with my baby? Why is it not?
What if I come up with a disease that's going to bankrupt me?
Yeah, so people are not thinking, it is not a big life question whether or not a God exists. But then what they do is they throw down hell in an attempt to try to make it a big question. We're going to make this an important question by building this afterlife and telling you it could be horrible for you forever. And so you have only your lifetime to decide. And what if you die tomorrow and then you didn't decide and it's too late because you didn't believe? And so this is just them basically saying, we have another couple looking at this car. Right? This is the pressure tactic to get you to tell you that you have to make the decision.
What if you die tonight and there is an afterlife? And the criteria is whether or not you were gullible enough to believe in some afterlife without sufficient evidence.
I don't. What do you mean?
He's asking, what if that's the filter? That if you believed it and there wasn't sufficient evidence, then you go to hell.
Yeah. What if this is a test on whether or not you are especially gullible?
Whether I would swallow it hook, line, and sinker. Yeah. I guess then I'm in another bad spot.
Yeah.
But it's funny that you said that though, because that's actually, I was talking to my mom about this process I'm in right now, and that's one of the things she pulled out is, what if you're wrong? What about Pascal and the whole thing?
Yeah.
So I mean,
Pascal is awful. I look at that, and the thing that gets me is they try to portray it as, if you believe and it's wrong, what have you lost? And I'll tell you what, when I was a devoted Christian, I had my whole life sunk into that religion. I mean, if I'd have kept on with that until the day I died, I would have lost my entire life to it. So it's a bunch of crap when they say, if you believe and you're wrong, it's nothing. It's just like the first caller we had. You may not have been able to hear that call, but there was a caller that called first. And basically, he's faking believing to please his family. It means he's going to church every Sunday. This is a person who's investing, and he doesn't even believe. But it's like, if you... So, and this is just to show that if you actually did believe it and you said, I'm going to devote myself, you bet you're going to be putting time and resource, money, time, energy, effort into this, trying to convince other people, doing what you think God wants you to do, praying for guidance, and then letting weird little intuitions rule your life, and which job you take and who you marry and whether or not you adopt this child. I mean, there are people who have huge life decisions based on these things that they believe about their religion. It's gigantic. The cost
like whether or not we take our kid to a doctor or
I've made those types of decisions myself.
Yeah. So I mean, it's not no cost to you if you believe in it and it's not true. There's a huge cost if you believe it and it's not true. You've basically given your life over to something that is incorrect.
Well, yeah. That's the cost. It's one of the many costs.
It's huge.
If you believe it and it's not true, that means you spent your entire life believing a lie, which prevented you from accessing what is actually true about reality.
But also devoting yourself to that and letting it guide your life.
Yeah.
Right.
Instead of owning and living your own life.
I completely agree. Because, like one of the things, and this is the last thing I'll say because I know there's probably not much time left, but one of the things that's interesting is, one of the Christian things, they always say, well, if you believe, you'll truly be free. The truth will set you free. But I personally kind of think, I'm actually, if I didn't believe, I'll be more free because I can kind of like just feel like, okay, I'm free to pursue what I want and not have like the constant thing,
Yes.
like constantly asking myself, well, is this what I should be doing? You know, like, and always having that kind of hanging over my head.
Yeah, you're not
you know?
having to double check all the time to see what you're supposed to want and what you're supposed to
Exactly.
have for your life. But the thing is, if you go off and do that, you're the evil sinner that just doesn't want to be responsible to God.
Yeah, the example that I've used before, you know, when I talk to college students, which would make you happier? To have the state assign you your major and your job? To have your parents decide your
you
major
marry.
and your job and who you marry? We would rebel against those choices and being made for us in almost every other circumstance. And yet, religions, particularly Christianity, have this idea that God has a plan for your life, and if you're not living up to God's plan, you are a failure. And that is that is abuse.
But more importantly to me is, when did it become a sign of being personally irresponsible to say that you want to take responsibility for your own life?
Yeah.
Seriously, is that not backward?
Yeah. I mean, it does seem that way. Yeah.
Hand your life
Well,
over to
thank you
God
guys
and you're
very
taking
much.
responsibility.
Yep.
You know, that's just assigning it off to somebody else.
Yeah.
Something else.
Like, just fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, thank you guys very much for everything you do. I appreciate it. Appreciate your show and your thoughts and everything. And please keep at it.
Thank you
Thanks,
for
Andy.
your call.
Appreciate it.
Yep. Goodbye.
Yep.
He said you got in a goodbye.
Yeah, I just didn't want to hang up on him beforehand. But
Where are we going?
Where are we going? Because we got like 5 minutes left. I think Wally's been on for a while.
Yeah,
Wally in Fort Meade, thanks for waiting.
Hey, Matt. Hey, Tracy. How's it going?
Hello. Good.
Pretty
Thank
good.
you.
All right. Well, I've got limited time, so I'm just going to get straight into it. So I was calling to address theistic claims of objective morality. So if we take an example from the Bible, Exodus 20:13, "Thou shalt not kill," that is a clear parameter set forth by God.
I'd argue that it's
assume
not
that
particularly clear, even if you read that as "Thou shalt not murder." But anyway, go ahead.
Okay, so I guess I'll leave some room in there to say that there's ambiguity. And then you go to 1 Samuel 15:3, where the order is coming down to go and slay all the Amalekites,
Yep.
like including the children.
Yep.
Wouldn't you say that there's a conflict there?
Not
And wouldn't
necessarily.
that kind of, no, not necessarily?
No, because so first of all, just in general, set aside the Bible. Specific rules override general rules. And so you could make a general rule of, hey, don't kill people except under these circumstances. And now you've not got a contradiction. You've got what you've got as a clarification. The commandment, thou shalt not kill or thou shalt not murder, has generally been viewed as not thou shalt not kill, because that would apply to everything you eat and, blah, blah, blah. But thou shalt not murder. And murder is a specific legal construct of an unjust killing, It does not apply to war and self-defense and, the other things. I think there are other contradictions in there with regard to, thou shalt not murder, but I want you to go take over this land and slaughter everybody and run your sword through all the pregnant women. I think that is far closer to a contradiction. But I don't know what that has to do with the
He was talking about objective morality.
the objective moral.
Okay, well, the basically what I'm trying to get at is, okay, you said when you were speaking about the context of "thou shalt not murder," you were saying that it's a legal term, or it's more of a legal term. That's how you were defining it, anyways, in that context. Going into the concept of unjust killing, basically to end somebody's life unjustly. You wouldn't say, in that context, that killing infant children would be unjust?
I just said that.
That'd be considered war crime.
I literally just said that exact thing.
Okay, well, I'm not trying to attribute, okay. So then I misheard it then. That was my fault.
But here, let me help you out,
Okay,
Wally. Let me just see, because I want to make sure I'm following too, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. But in a weird way, it almost seems like Matt might have helped you make your point, even though you may not have intended it. But it sounds almost like what just happened in this conversation is that there is what should be a clear command, and yet that clear command can be reinterpreted in a million different ways to allow for killing. in many different
Yeah, okay.
contexts, right? So what
Yes,
you're
that's
basically
that's my
saying is you've
point.
got this objective morality, which is thou shalt not kill, and then you've got like a billion exceptions to it anytime God decides he wants you to kill somebody.
See, I don't have a problem.
Okay.
I don't have a problem with objective morality. I've actually argued on behalf of it. I do have big problems with.
Well, I think he's talking
More
specifically about the religious
I know.
concept of it.
I'm getting to that.
Yeah, that's
I'm getting to that.
go ahead.
So I have more objections to moral relativism and all the other things. The truth of the matter, though, is that all of the objections that religions raise when they start talking about secular morality are either not real problems or problems that they can't solve either. When they say, oh, if there's no God, if there's no objective moral standard, then you have no way of showing that you're right and somebody else is wrong. Well, guess what? That's true even if you think you have a God, because I don't accept what you and your God have to say about morals. You have to convince me with something other than I think that a God said this. And so they can't solve the problems either. And the truth is, for most versions of religious morality, it's not any more objective than anything they're complaining about, because ultimately you get to something that must be like divine command theory, that something is moral because God says so. Now they'll twist that and say, no, it's not about what God says, it's about what's consistent with God's character, and God's character doesn't change, except that, at least in the Bible, God's character definitely does change, and what his prescriptions are changes. So it's a big mess.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the whole concept of God's character not changing just seems, to me personally, I know you just said this, but it seems completely asinine, especially when you're talking about you're going to lay specific parameters on how people are going to conduct themselves in society or on Earth, in the context of when the Ten Commandments were given. But then you're not going to include any caveats. There's no specific for you to engage with other people. So when you give these broad, thou shalt not kill, but then you're going to caveat it with later on, okay, you can go kill these people. It's okay for you to kill them because I said that you can kill them.
Yes.
So, I mean, it seems like it loses the moniker of being objective, because it's at that point it's subjective to God's interpretation of what is okay.
Yeah, it almost seems like the only thing
because
objective about it is the foundation, which is whatever God says goes at any given time.
This is why I've raised the issue many times. You can tell me what the Bible says or what you think the Bible says, but that doesn't tell me anything at all about what God says, if God says anything. You have to establish that link.
Yeah.
But this idea that that there are moral prescriptions within a particular religious text doesn't mean that they're right. There has to be some other way to establish whether or not this is correct. And so, this prohibition against eating shellfish or wearing, clothes of two different claws, and against, those are the simple things. And if we can't get the simple things right in your holy book, or we can't make any sort of connection to reality, what you have is this is not the thinking of an all-wise, all-powerful, perfectly moral being. This is the thinking of ancient people, 66 books written by a bunch of different individuals, and of course they're going to represent some of the best thinking of that time, but I'd like to think that we've been able to think even better in the intervening thousands of years since those things were written.
Well, and this is an interesting thing, because we used to bring this point up in a different context, but like Abraham getting the command to kill Isaac, right? Mm-hmm. So the question would be, does God want people to kill their children, right? To just kill them for no reason? And most Christians, I think, would say no, that you're not supposed to kill your children according to God. And yet, what the example of Abraham and Isaac shows us is that when God comes along and says, kill your child, who has been a very good child, since you've had him, Abraham doesn't say, whoa, God, this is really weird. This is an antithesis to what you've told us that we're supposed to do as far as how to treat our children. What he says is, yeah, okay, let's get some wood and a knife and go up the hill with Isaac, right? I mean, the morality is simply whatever God says at any given time. And if God tells you to do something God said don't do yesterday, then you just go do it today, because now this is the new normal.
And God told me that it's the end of the show.
Okay.
My apologies
thanks for having me on.
Thank you for
Wally. I
your
appreciate
call.
it. Yeah, call back, and I'll be here again next week with Jen. And next week is Easter. I didn't even think to plan anything special. Like I think I still have that rabbit on a crucifix that sings "Jesus Loves Me" from like 10, 11 years ago.
Bring it.
If I find that, I might bring it just for nostalgia's sake.
You should, and if not, you should bring video of the toy.
Anyway, we appreciate everybody hanging out with us this week. We'll be back again next week. Thanks to Tracie. Thanks to the studio audience on the other side of the glass. Don't
Sorry
forget
for callers.
about Star of
Are we
India.
doing after shows at all?
I can't.
Okay, so we can't.
Wow, I just heard something loud driving by. Anyway, that's the show for this week. Thanks to the guys in the studio. We'll be back next week. Take care until then.
All right.
This is Russell Glasser, host of The Atheist Experience. You know, The Atheist Experience is made possible by volunteers and the generous support of viewers like you. If the promotion of positive atheist culture and separation of church and state are values that you hold, please consider contributing by becoming an ACA member or visiting our product page at evolvefish.com under the Partner tab. Thank you.